here. Welcome to DLN4, Translation Technology, and I'd just like to introduce Mark Shuttleworth, who's quite new at UCL, and he's one of quite a large group of translation people who've joined UCL quite quickly, so that might be something you can just mention briefly at the beginning of your talk. It's a hands-on session, which is great, so we like to get our hands dirty with new software. So anyway, I'll just let Mark start.
Well, thanks very much, Chris. It's very nice to be here. As Chris mentioned, I, along with a number of other members of staff, moved over from Imperial College. We had the translation unit up and running there for about 12 years, and in their wisdom they decided they didn't want a translation unit anymore, and we're immensely grateful to UCL for taking unit on, taking us all on. Personally speaking, I'm delighted to be here. I think probably it's a better place for a translation person to be than Imperial College. So thank you very much for your hospitality. I'm very pleased to be here. As Chris mentioned, it's going to be a hands-on session. We don't have a lot of time. I'm going to focus in the hands-on part of the session on a particular technology known as translation memory. Now, just out of curiosity, has anyone used a translation memory system ever before? Does anyone know what a translation memory system is? Okay, right. But apart from Jesper, people aren't familiar with that term. Okay, excellent. Well, all be revealed in a minute or two. I'm going to take you quite quickly through a presentation which covers the whole area of translation technology. Translation memory is one of many different types of translation technology. So I'm going to take you through a few definitions first of all. Different types of translation. What is human translation? Okay. Well, I'll offer, I think, a fairly uncontroversial definition of what human translation is. Of course, quite a lot of translation happens out of the translator's mother tongue as well, but I'm not going to get into that controversy. Okay. Now, in the translation industry, this is reserved for particular types of translation. This is human translation, perhaps without the aid of any kind of technology. So sensitive documents that don't contain much redundant material. Now you'll see the point of redundant material. Redundant material implies repeated material. Okay? And documents that don't go through large numbers of iterations. Once again, we'll see why that's important in a few minutes' time. Okay? It's quite an old definition now, actually. See what the web page is that it comes from, Babelfish. I believe it's still around, Babelfish, actually, but I don't think people use it very much nowadays. So machine translation, the next one. Translation performed by a computer, importantly, with or without human assistance. Okay. And then another traditional area of application was used in the 90s by government bodies, by military establishments. They were the biggest users of machine translation, and they had enough money to invest in producing a really high-spec MT system, perhaps for translating particular types of documents from one language into another. Very focused, very specific, and the quality was quite a lot better than what we get from Google Translate or Microsoft Translator. These days, however, the way that you and I will use machine translation, we use it to get the gist of web pages that we can't understand. And it's very useful, it serves a very important purpose, Google Translate, whatever it happens to be. However, it is used a lot in the translation industry and not in that particular constituency I just mentioned, the large-scale organisations. It's used for translating large volumes of information, simply when there aren't enough translators around to do it themselves. And this could be with the use of post-editing. So you end up with a raw translation, and then the translator stops being a translator, but starts being a post-editor, and tidies up the output from Google or whatever system it happens to be. It's also used for translation on the move, mobile translation, and increasingly, and I hope to show you a clip a little bit later on, speech-to-speech translation. Here we are, a couple of examples of cutting-edge machine translation applications. Has anyone come across WordLens? You can download it onto your phone. I'm just going to show you a demo. Right, I'm coming on now not to machine translation but computer-aided translation. This is where it's at to a very large extent for freelance translators, people who spend their time translating as their main occupation. Okay, computer-aided translation is a type of translation in which translators use computer programs to do that translation. And it remains their translation. They produce the translation. They're helped by these computer programs which help them to translate more quickly, more accurately and more consistently. And translation memory, that we're going to be looking at shortly, falls inside this bracket. Remember when I was presenting the definition of human translation, I said bear in mind this what it says about being applied when there's no redundancy and when texts don't go through a large number of editions. Computer-aided translation is at its best when you're working on a text which has plenty of repetition, or an update of a text that's already been translated. In practice, this means it works, or it gives the greatest productivity benefit when you're translating this type of material. Okay. However, there are plenty of translators who will use translation memory for all of their translation activity. At Intel, they have a very large amount of material that needs to be translated, and this was a list that was presented at a conference I attended by a senior executive from the Intel Corporation. And as we go down this list, the item becomes more and more voluminous, so it becomes less realistic for it to be coped with by human translators alone, and other methodologies have to be used. Translation memory, in other words computer-assisted translation, maybe post-edited machine translation, maybe sometimes unpost-edited machine translation, or maybe when you get to these huge knowledge bases which consist of endless questions and answers that have been asked and answered in the past, and are available for people to consult. Considerable volume of information. Sometimes they just get to be translated by machine translation on the fly. Now, just for the sake of completeness, there are a couple more terms it's worth sharing with you. There's localization, sometimes known as LION or L10N, 10 being the number of letters between the L and the N. Localization is translating software or web pages or any other kind of e-content, help files, video games and so on. Translation theorists tend to say it's a type of translation. Localization experts will actually say that translation is a type with a subset of localization. The point about localization, to be a localizer you need to be able to use a large number of different computer tools, whereas that's not necessarily the case for a lot of different types of translation. But also, you need to be prepared to carry out quite a high level of cultural adaptation in the material you're translating, which is why they've come to use a different term for that activity. So those are the typical areas of application of localization specifically. Then finally, quite a new one, crowdsourcing. This is coming to be used increasingly. If people here use Facebook in a language other than English, that interface would have been produced by the process of crowdsourcing. And crowdsourcing involves inviting in an organised manner a large number of volunteers to produce the translation themselves. And in the case of Facebook, these volunteers were all users of Facebook, so it was something presumably they cared about, and they worked hard to find the optimum translation. The word "like" in Facebook is rather odd in English, so that would be quite a difficult term to find satisfactory translations for in all the other languages. Okay. So, translation memory now. Well, what's translation memory all about? Based on what might be a translator's wish list. Okay, in the days before translation memory, perhaps many translators would have regretted that they were unable to translate the material quickly enough. I'm sure that's still the case. However quickly you go, you want to go faster, I guess. But translation memory allows you to translate faster, generally speaking. You never have to translate the same sentence twice, or if you come across a sentence similar to one that's already been translated, it will suggest the original one to you, and you just edit it. You just make the necessary changes. And then through a concordance feature, you can go back and access your old translations, and you can check up how you translated a particular word or phrase 6 months ago, so you don't need to be constantly reinventing the wheel. And as we'll see, modern TM tools allow you to receive extra help and assistance from external sources, such as online machine translation. And the technology, which has been around in a commercial form, has been around for slightly more than 20 years, and I guess has been developed for about 5 years on top of that, is based on this premise, that the most valuable resource for a translator is old translations aligned with the originals of which they are translations. They provide more solutions or solutions to more translation problems than any other possible resource. So, a translation memory is simply a bilingual database consisting of sentences in one language aligned with sentences in the other language. As you work through your text, if you come across a sentence that resembles or is identical to a previous sentence, it will suggest that back to you through a process of what's known as fuzzy matching. When you buy a TM tool, or when you start using a TM tool, it comes as an empty box. You don't get a starter translation memory. But you gradually fill it with your content, and of course the bigger it is, the more useful it is. If you've been using it for 6 months, for example, you actually have quite a lot of content in it. But even after one sentence, you have a translation memory, and if the next sentence is the same as the first, or similar, then you're getting benefit from it immediately. Translation memories can, of course, be shared, or indeed downloaded. Unlike machine translation, the translator is always in control. The translator decides on what the final form of the sentence being translated is going to be. Of course, the principle garbage in, garbage out applies here, as in so many other areas as well. If the original translation is rubbish, then that rubbish is going to be reproduced endlessly. So as long as you get it right the first time, it will continue to be right. And we're not talking about translating Voltaire or Dickens or Tolstoy or whoever, where stylistic variation is important. We're talking about translating manuals, so if the translation is correct once, it's likely to continue to be correct however many times the sentence is repeated. So your translation memory database will store each sentence as it's translated, plus the original. The original needs to be in electronic form. It's got to be in electronic form. If you're presented with a document and you want to use TM, you have to scan it. And it will suggest the old translation back to you when you need it. bigger it gets, the more valuable it becomes. Translation memory does not generally exist in isolation. It comes as one component, generally the main component, of a suite of tools, generally known as sometimes called a CAT tool, computer-assisted learning tool, but the term now being increasingly used is a TENT, a translation environment tool. And this will allow you to edit your text, edit your translation. It will allow you, importantly, to import all kinds of different file formats, and they look the same in your translation memory tool. You can work on a Word document one day, and then your next assignment might be to translate an Excel spreadsheet. So you can import that and translate it, or an HTML file, whatever it happens to be. And then at the end, when you finish, you export it again, and it gets reassembled as an HTML file or as a Word document. Just now in the target language, just been translated, but it should look the same as the original. The translation memory itself, a glossary facility allowing you to store words that you think are important and then to look them up later on. And it generally allows you to align old translations with the original, so you can create a new translation memory from nothing. This is the industry standard, SDL Trados, but it's one of quite a number of different tools. Some of these have been around for 20 years or more. Others are very, very recent. It's still a developing technology.
Is any of this freeware?
Yes, quite a lot of it is. The one I'm going to show you is freeware. So, the industry standard ones cost anything up to about €500. SDL Trados, for example, or MemoQ, they cost about that. Sometimes special offers, but barring a special offer, that's how much it costs. So this is just a quick screenshot of MemoQ. You can see this is the source text, which has been segmented. It's been split up into sentences. So the translator is translating sentence by sentence, and translating involves just typing the translation into the box here. And then when each sentence is translated, there is generally a key combination which you hit, and that marks it as officially translated, and you're happy with it, and you move on. What's going on here, it's showing results from the translation memory, and these can be pasted in by a key combination, or you can even get the tool to do it automatically if you want to. These things are generally highly configurable. Okay, now this is the one important thing to remember. These are types of computer-assisted translation. They are not machine translation, so the machine is not doing the translation. They are actually quite dumb applications. They have no knowledge at all of any human language. You have to, you just rely on the machine to remember stuff for you, basically. Okay, so that's almost it. The whole point of translation technology, I guess, is to automate the translation process. With machine translation, that automation is obvious because the machine does the translation for you. With translation memory, you could say that it becomes gradually more and more automated the more content you have in your TM tool. And there are various, with a lot of the TM tools that you can use, there are lots of very clever features that allow the tool to pre-translate as much of the text as it can, but using your own content. In other words, using the glossaries that you've built up over the years and TM you've built up over the years. It almost after time can begin to resemble machine translation. And finally, you can now combine the two quite easily, and if there's time I want to show you how that works. And then your translation, as I mentioned before, becomes a question of post-editing a text rather than actually translating it from scratch. Okay, there we are. So that's it. Any questions at this point? No? Okay, excellent. So how are we for time? Good, okay. The tool I'm going to use, hopefully you're going to use, is called WordFast Anywhere. And it's available free over the web. The only thing is you have to register, you have to create an ID. It's quite free, and once you've created it, you can log into it anywhere, obviously. Hence the name.
And this is a tent.
I suppose you could call it a tent, yes. This is a software as a service. This is SaaS, of course, but it is a tent, you could say. I can't resist telling you, this was created by a man called Yves Champollion. And yes, indeed, he is the great grand nephew of the Champollion who discovered the Rosetta Stone. Same family. Comes from the translation business, I guess. Okay.